My name is Dr. Mark Tebboth, and I am an Associate Professor at the School of Global Development at the University of East Anglia. And I will be hosting this seminar, just to give you a brief overview of how it's going to work, and then I'll introduce our speaker. So. This is the third in a series of 3 seminars which have been looking at issues linked broadly to migration and climate change, delivered under the auspices of a project funded by the FCDO and IDRC called Success, which is looking at trying to understand, evaluate the role of migration as a contributor to successful adaptation. So this is our autumn seminar series, and then we are planning another seminar series in the spring semester. So do keep your eye out for that. But I think that will do for the general introduction. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Neil Adger, who is a professor of human geography at the University of Exeter. Neil's also on the oh look, there was Heidi just appearing on the wonk. Neil's also, Exeter, along with the Indian Institute of Human Settlements and ICIMOD, are the 3 lead institutions on the Success project. Neil also happened to supervise me very briefly when I was doing my PhD before I'd scared him off and he ran down to Exeter. So I don't know whether that says more about me or him. But anyway, it's really nice to see you again, Neil. I'm very much looking forward to your presentation, which is going to be focusing on the role of, on empathy and how that can help bring different socially differentiated people together. So I think I shall now hand over to you, Neil, if you're good to go.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you to Ritka, Nietzsche, all my colleagues at UEA for this invitation. Mark's going to tell me that he can see my slides.
I can see your slides, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this invitation to talk on this part of the series, this part of our collaboration. We've been thinking about it internally, but now we're talking about it externally, about precarity specifically, and precarity in migration dynamics. My talk today is entitled Tackling Precarity, so actually doing something about it through creating empathy between new urban populations and planners. But let me take a step back. First of all, to say something that we may is commonly agreed, or we may have different views on this. But to my mind, there is a common root to our crises of unsustainability, to our nature and climate emergencies, and to widespread precarity and marginalization. And that common root is economic inequality. And that economic inequality leads to the overexploitation of the non-human world, leading to environmental unsustainability, but also to the overexploitation of each other. This economic inequality, in economic terms, in wealth and in income, and in economic power, leads to directly to this overexploitation. The novelty, I guess, in this thesis, though, that it is the inequality and the mechanism by which this happens is the economic inequality and social distance between people and distance from nature reduces empathy between groups and enables exploitation, and actually enables this exploitation. By empathy, I mean the ability to stand in the shoes of others, the ability to actually take the perspective of others. And the thesis today is that empathy can be built through experience and through deliberative democracy, and that both precarity and marginalization and a lack of empathy and overexploitation are both malleable. They're not just a state of affairs that we need to observe as social scientists or observe as researchers and bemoan. We can actually do something about it. The ideas from this come from a group of us based here in Exeter, but led by Katrina Brown, also formerly, obviously, from the School of Global Development at UEA in our time, where it's a group of ecological, social, and behavioral scientists. We got together and looked at the evidence for this and made this argument. It goes slightly further than simply looking at empathy between people. We argue that lack of empathy for nature and for others, these two elements, limits the motivation to conserve the environment and to enhance sustainability. And we go further and say that this relationship between empathy and sustainability is mediated by place. That when people take the perspectives of others, we look at the evidence for this across many different disciplines, this leads to more what we would call, or what psychologists refer to as pro-social behavior. So actions that actually enhance not only ourselves and in our own enlightened well-being, but actually the actions of others. And also lead to increase in pro-environmental behaviors. But all this is mediated through the idea of place, and that people interacting in place, appreciating nature in place, leads to this positive, circular, virtuous circle around empathy and sustainability. Now, it may begin to sound like a bit of a information deficit model, that actually all we need is more information, that we just need to know about each other, and that will inevitably lead to action. And clearly that is not the case. Whenever we look at cognitive, or the different dimensions of this, like cognitive and emotional empathy, cognitive empathy is the capacity to understand the perspective of others, but that doesn't necessarily lead to action. And similarly, emotional empathy is about is feeling the perspective of others, so an affective and emotional response to that knowledge. But even that doesn't necessarily lead to action. But what we're looking at here, or we're narrowing it down not to look at the non-human world, we're looking at the idea of social empathy, which is the concern for others. So just looking at how people interact with each other based on socioeconomic disparity and inequality in contemporary society. And there we argue, or we look at the evidence, that there are two mechanisms by which social empathy can actually lead to action. In that situation, as we talked about, of structural inequality, some people, asymmetry in power and resources and the rest of it, that having empathetic individuals in positions of power leads to the consideration of more marginalized groups, is one mechanism. And secondly, the generation of empathy also is empowering in itself, and means that people are more likely to exercise their own agency. This seems possibly quite far away from what we're talking about in terms of precarity of migrant populations. So what do we mean by that? In the research that we've undertaken with prior research that I'm going to talk about now, we have documented what precarity looks like. We've done that from the bottom up, and we've asked migrant populations about their perspectives on insecurity and precarity. And this is what they have told us. And this is our map of the dimensions of precarity and well-being. They are obviously to do with, that's a detailed map. But if you look at the principal 6 categories there in the inner circle, you'll see that they are to do with health, education, nutrition, and other elements of material well-being, and that social well-being, and as we've classed it, dignity, are clearly issues that are not just around the individual. They are clearly issues that are about the neighborhood, they are about social interaction, and they are also about place. So this is what insecurity or precarity looks like among migrant populations. At least it is in the place that we have been working with our colleagues at the University of Dhaka, also now part of Success and the Clare actions moving forward. This is research that we've undertaken in, as I was saying, in one rapidly growing city, the city of Chattogram, in southeast Bangladesh, formerly Chittagong. And in prior research, we showed where migrants were moving from right to, it's a significant growth pole. People move there all the time, and they're moving from within Chittagong division, but also from Khulna, Barishal, and other areas of principally other areas of southern Bangladesh. In this research, then, what we attempted to do was to generate policy opportunities and address some constraints for what to do about precarity. So it wasn't enough, we thought, just to document what that precarity is, but that we would move forward through deliberation and through experimentation to try to address that precarity. This is a form of what we would call action research, where it's not simply observational research that many of us as social scientists are quite used to. This is directly intervening and making social change happen, and then documenting the outcomes, researching it from the inside out. Let me just say, of course, that that this isn't necessarily the most popular type of research. There are significant constraints and limitations to doing this, and there are ethical considerations in doing so as well. But we can come back to those. The aim of this research was basically to make migrants' lives better, to reduce their precarity. And that is a very normative stance. And of course, who gets to say what better is in this particular case is one of the risks of doing action research, which is the imposition of norms and values from outside it. But our hypothesis in this is that safe and sustainable cities are promoted by the speed and the effectiveness of the integration of new migrant populations. And in Chattogram, which has grown from 1.5 million to 5.5 million, at least in the last census, a significant proportion, majority of the population are lifetime migrants, i.e. they've moved there. And so how a rapidly growing city like Chattogram becomes sustainable, our hypothesis is that the speed, the effectiveness of the integration of these new migrant populations is going to lead to something safe and sustainable, meeting the goals of SDG 11. But our research in this case is not simply observing this, but is going out to generate spaces for that integration, generating policy insights, trying to generate consensus around those, and importantly, generating empathy between the actors that we're looking at, or the actors who've been the participants actually in the research itself. We do that by encouraging people to take each other's perspectives. So we exchange perspectives, and we'll do that, and I'll talk about the methods for doing that. So it's sharing perspectives to generate this emotional and cognitive engagement and empathy in effect, and look at the outcomes of that to see how that improved understanding of other situation and the idea of a moral impetus to address these sorts of challenges leads to action that we talked about, the motivation for for actions helping each other, but also empowering and improving agency for the people actually directly involved in it. And this type of research is I guess best explained, at least in the abstract, as being a narrative approach, generating these perspectives and allowing other people to have insight into your world and their world means that we focused on narratives, and we also used visual methods. So this is the general sense. Let me just say that narrative methods rely on storytelling. We make sense of our lives by telling stories. We tend to put ourselves at the center of our own stories, but the stories reveal our relationship with the external world. They tend to have beginnings, middle, and end. And when we examine or when we analyze what stories are and narratives, they often include meanings and ways of making sense of events. So it's a great way to get to causality, to what leads to what, and in the way that people tell the stories of how they got to Chattergram, what their life means, and what they could do about it. The generation of narratives, as we'll try to show you, is in itself empowering for those involved, because they are ways to express views and beliefs just through this, device of telling stories. We did this in the research by using visual methods, principally a method called photo voice, which in this case, to go into the mechanics of it, we recruited 17 participants to work with us for over an 18-month period. Some of them, one cohort of them, were planners in the city. So they were the people making the decisions about the investments around all the infrastructure, the developments, the master plan of the city going forward. And the other half of them, the other cohort, were lifetime migrants, some of them relatively recent migrants, and all of them living in informal settlements within the city. So they all told stories about themselves, and they did this by taking photographs, and some of them took hundreds of photographs, and some of them many less photographs. And we asked them to select from among these photographs and tell us what they meant, and tell us what precarity, insecurity, and a safe and sustainable city meant for them. What we didn't anticipate this, because cameras take photographs of the external world and allow you to make those connections, is just how many photographs end up being selfies. Now I'll show you some photographs taken by the participants, and all of these are used with permission. And this is one of our city planners who took this photograph to demonstrate the waterlogging across the city. It's subject to lots of flooding, and you can tell that. But you can tell that he's taken that photograph himself to illustrate that, but putting himself absolutely in the center of the story, as you would anticipate, as we all do if we just look at our phones, how many selfies have we got? And then he gave the camera to the same person, gave the camera to others, talked about place and identity and the places that he likes within, and the places they're trying to conserve within Chattergram. Other photographs describe lack of agency and other dynamics of this. There's a photograph of the back of someone's house. You can see these sandbags, and the narrative along with this is about the precarity of tenure and overexploitation by landlords. Health and security, again, fantastic photographs of in this case, this was one of our migrant participants whose youngster had gone and stepped on some glass in the river and had a cut, and this was an articulation or a representation of their insecurity, the public health, the risk of disease, and the rest of it. And also people talked about positive integration and the legitimacy of their communities. This was a group from the ethnic minority, religious minority, Chittagong Hill Tracts, who invited the mayor of Chittagong along to their community celebrations, and this was, a representation of how the integration of their community into the life of Chattergram could be enhanced. And also photographs, really fantastic photographs of economic activities and economic solidarity, in this case, a cooperative society, the sort of letterheading from that activity that was going on to demonstrate how economic solidarity and the role of credit in actually reducing precarity in the city. All those photographs and the narratives around them led to this map, as we say, of that allows us to describe what that precarity looks like and the rest of it. But it was actually what we wanted to then generate this solidarity and generate empathy between them. So you can see just sort of a representation here. This is from the migrant cohort, just some of the issues around safety, sustainability, that we talked about, and some of the direct quotations. And for this cohort, what they did was they selected the most important photographs to them that actually meant something. And we printed them and we rehearsed with them these stories about why these represented key issues in precarity in the city. And then on the same sort of dimensions, these were the photographs, or just a selection of the photographs taken by the planners themselves about the same issues. And they had their own photographs and they had their own priorities as to what those looked like. And then they sat down and shared each other's perspectives, and these were giving perspectives. So sitting on a table between migrants, planners, evening up that playing field by everyone having the same number, in this case 3 photographs of the principal issues that they wanted to talk about. And that visual method, this particular set of photographs, increases the legitimacy of those stories, and we had rehearsed with people what those were, and put everyone on the same footing, and allowed people to talk through these images of themselves. Don't forget, everyone lives in the city. These are, this is not 2 cohorts who are, sort of completely from different places to talk that through. Throughout this process, then, of generating perspectives, generating emotional and cognitive engagement, leading towards empowerment and motivation for action, we documented whether or not the people's perspectives on this. And I have to say, people were incredibly positive about the process, not least the planners, in terms of it being eye-opening for them and not having these deliberative forums in which, in a safe space, they can hear the perspectives of people who tend to be marginalized within society and within civic organizations and political systems, leading to some very practical solutions on these policy constraints, or identifying of policy constraints and policy opportunities, just the provision of market space, the prioritization of some public health issues and various other things on where the migrants live, where migrants work and their workplaces, and tenure and tenure insecurity, and also how the city and public provision works for them. Let me just finish that by just some observations, I guess, rather than conclusions. I think we'd all agree, but we have a tendency as researchers to take a notion like precarity and say, we haven't really got a handle on it, we don't really know the elements of it, and to worry in detail about measurement, about getting the right perspectives of being more and more accurate in our diagnosis of what precarity is. But I think we need to take a step back from that and realize that precarity is not just out there to be observed. It's not a natural state. It's it's an outcome of economic inequality, and that economic inequality is something that we need to address, and it's something that we can do something about. My observation in this is that the spatial dimensions, should I say, of inequality, that people not living cheek by jowl next to each other, not being exposed to each other, to my mind, is actually one of the most insidious dimensions of inequality that actually creates the landscapes of precarity and creates a lack of empathy between people if you just don't interact with them on a daily basis. What we've tried to show here in this research, led by Tasneem and others, that these experiments in deliberative democracy and engagement do yield benefits. In the context of Chattogram, the City Development Corporation, they've rolled out these methods in effective consultation of getting people's perspectives right through the city, following on from our own deliberative experiment, that this is actually now seen as a really fantastic way to get information to actually enable planners to take perspectives and just see from the bottom up of how these elements work. And finally, with all researchers, as with all researchers, and thinking this through in the context of our own cross-disciplinary consortium here as funded under the CLARE programme, I think there is a greater need, or there's always a greater need for research, but I think it's a greater need to look across disciplines. A lot of this insights that we started with this and this way to think about how empowerment, deliberation, and democracy actually leads to, can lead to it, is focusing on the idea of empathy, and the idea of empathy, is the domain, we talk about empathy in many of the social sciences and in the, right across the humanities as well. But certainly from the language that I've been using is insights from social psychology and principally, but these, there are other domains of knowledge, other ways to think about this. And so this is a plea, I guess, for cross-disciplinary efforts to be plural in our efforts, borrowing from right across the disciplines, including social psychology in this case, to understand the role of perspective, empathy, in inertia, why things don't happen and how things can potentially happen. Now, one of the great lessons in life is that timing is everything, certainly in sport and in comedy, apparently, and the rest of it. So the great news is that the paper that I've just been talking about, the title of my talk today, it was published yesterday. So I think Lucy Snabuva, led by Lucy Snabuva, this write-up, and of course our colleagues at Rambrew at the University of Dhaka, Tasneem, Tamim, Rocky, and others have been directly involved in this. So for that published just yesterday in Urban Sustainability, and you can go and Google it and find a link to it. And everything I've said this afternoon is contained there. So thank you very much to our funders for that. The original research was funded by the UKRI, the Economic and Social Research Council, and of course our current funders and external collaborators. Thank you.
Brilliant. I can say thanks very much, Neil. This is your 3-minute warning to finish. I'm issuing it now. So you've done excellently well to squidge so much into 25 minutes worth of talking. Really fascinating presentation. Loved hearing about Bangladesh and the work you've done there with Photo Voice, some of which I've heard before in consortium meetings, but it's nice to see it all presented, I guess, as a kind of a complete picture to carry on with the Photo Voice analogy. And great as well, as you said, that the paper was out yesterday. So timing has been impeccable. So we've got
a close run thing.
We've got about 30 minutes now for questions and conversation, which is a lovely amount of time. So I shall open up. If you've got a question, feel free. I mean, it would be nice if you could turn your camera on and come on the mic, as Nitya looks primed to do. Similarly, stick your hand up and I'll try and keep an eye on what's going on in terms of who wants to ask a question and whatnot. But I will hand over to you, Nitya.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Neil. Really enjoyed the presentation and hearing about the work. I really have I mean, you did try to link empathy with precarity. So
Yeah.
my question is more kind of conceptual, I guess, conceptual one. That to some extent, we understand precarity as sort of, as you said, economic inequality, unequal power relations. It's something which is structural, which people are often entitled, to particular types of power or location or the kind of house they live in by birth or, depending on who they are, what levels of education they have, and so on. So a lot of it is quite structural. And I think your mapping was really interesting because most of the focus seems to be on material and, of course, dignity as a very important part of that. So, in a sense, I really appreciate this approach, but empathy is kind of moving away. It's sort of drawing on people's goodwill, if you like, voluntarily. Like you would say that a philanthropist, we ask the rich people to voluntarily give something rather than some kind of a tax or a redistributive measure. So I'm just wondering how, I mean, it's not very well formulated, but I was just thinking conceptually in my head, this idea of voluntary philanthropy, empathy, very important, but very different from a sort of redistributive structural approach.
I know what you're saying, Nitya. I share the same concerns, and we've debated this long and hard. So thank you for that question, which I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer. I mean, I did point out in this that this looks like a focus on internal perceptions, and a way that we individually perceive the world, and therefore is not something that is, in any sense dialectic or, to do with how structures are. But I think that the spatial dimensions of inequality, people not living together, all these sort of that economic inequality reinforces that lack of empathy directly between peoples. You could say it's deliberate, in fact, in many cases, which is the separation of us into in-group and out-group, and say, that we've got a natural order of things. That inequality means that these type of people are, from their historical legacy or place in society are better off, and the rest of it, and that therefore the sort of marginalization has got is just a natural state of affairs. Whereas I think the emphasis on empathy and common humanity does actually demonstrate, I mean, there's various other ways to look at this, but actually does demonstrate that common cause among things. It does appear to be, as I say, a bit of an information deficit type idea that more we know or more we can stand in other people's shoes, the more that we're going to have action. And that clearly isn't the case. But I think it's the role of empathy within political systems, and within civil society, and within the ability to for collective action, both formally and informally, that seems to be where the action is, or where we can actually make most difference in this. But I share your concerns. I'm not sure that answers your question, but I share your concerns about going from something that is completely structural and saying, well, actually, it's economic inequality being the root, and we need to address that, and we need to address that through public policy. But we're never going to get that without a social license of people not being able to see the perspective of others. Thanks.
Thanks, Neil. I don't know, Mark, if I don't want to dominate, but I just had a follow-up, if that's okay.
Fire away, Nitya.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. I think that's really useful. And I mean, just your one of the slides where you have that perspective taking and sharing thing. I guess the change is really coming in the perspectives. I mean, the change that you want is in the perspectives of the policymakers.
Yes, in effect, I mean, we're quite instrumental about that. I mean, it does. This is, of course, working with a small group of people. This is, you know, the scale of what we do, I guess, what we all do in social science. So we're not affecting change by, working with, working with hundreds of thousands of people, but we're demonstrating a proof of concept. Of course, we want the planners to change their perspectives, and that is explicit. That's explicit in the research design. It's one thing doing this sort of research, which is you have to be upfront. You have to say, look, we're really hoping that you're going to engage in this. It's quite costly for you in terms of your time over the course of a year, but we guarantee you that you will have your eyes opened and take different perspectives. But of course, it is empowering for everyone, and that the migrant communities that we worked with thought this was fantastic as well, and the opportunities to just be engaged in this and to take these photographs and to be listened to, or to be in the same room as people that they wouldn't necessarily be in the same room is equally empowering. And possibly we haven't done lots of individual sort of direct evaluation of this, but it certainly increases agency. Thanks.
Thank you.
I've got a quick follow-up question to that thread, Neil, which I'll ask, and then I'll bring in Barakat. You talked near the end of your presentation about the fact that this method, I assume you meant the photo voice, is being rolled out and being used more widely by planners.
Yeah.
Is it being used, and again, in a way that kind of promotes equality in how it's being delivered? So in your research by the kind of the wider group, the planners were taking pictures as well as the migrant cohort were taking pictures. Is that something that's being replicated as it's being rolled out more widely, or has it become more not necessarily meant in a pejorative way, but kind of more extractive in that it's just the communities that are taking the pictures to enable the planners to understand different needs? And if so, how do you think that kind of keys into the discussions that you've just been having around empathy?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's a very good point. Yeah, we should. So all as social scientists using visual methods, you can use them for different purposes, and the standard method for using these types of in-depth storytelling, storyboarding, photo voice, all these different visual methods, they have the advantages of visual methods, but quite often they are just used as observational tools of the way to get people's stories out. So they articulate it in a particular way, and you can derive meaning and causality and all these sorts of things. So that is the most common use. It was, or step forward, I guess, was this deliberately using, or deliberately encouraging the planners who we've been talking to for quite some time, or Tasneem and her colleagues have been talking to for some time, to allow them to, to engage in this experiment themselves. In the, as I understand it, in Chatgram, in some of the processes, those experiments continue, and new people within the planning department are recruited into this, and and this perspective taking is, the perspective taking is where it's at, not just in the narratives that are generated. But it is, but these methods are used widely and are used in all sorts of other places, and including by ourselves, where they're just more of a observational technique, as it were, or a way to derive what these narratives are. Thanks.
Super, thanks very much. So over to Barakat. Nice to see you, Barakat.
Thanks, Mark. Neil, I hope you'd remember me from your UAE times.
Absolutely, Barakat.
All right. Okay.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you after a long time. Yeah. Um, but I have a sort of two or three comments. Now, some of which would overlap with the issues Nitya had raised.
Mhm.
So first of all, I'm very, very fascinated by the work you do. I think it's a very important contribution, particularly in terms of, in terms of theory, in terms of conceptual models, empathy, or similar types of issues have been incorporated, including even in economic models or so social psychology models. But the fact that you bring this down to a specific policy related issue is, I think, a very, very important contribution. Also, the sort of the policy related suggestions that comes from your research, in a sense, is a sort of a low cost kind of policy implementation. It doesn't require a huge amount of. So I think it is a very, very positive contribution, because it is also, I'm an economist, because it's also low cost. We have to think about the cost of policy issues. So because of that, I really like the and I'm also empathetic with your your focus on empathy, essentially because I think we know structural transformation is the sort of the ultimate medicine to solve this type of problems. But that doesn't mean we should not look at even marginal change before that structural transformation comes. So always we have to think about, we are not like sort of revolutionaries which try to change society as a whole. So even if our research, our policy analysis brings some marginal change which improve conditions, we should not discount the worth of it. Yeah? So because of that, I'm very much empathetic. And you have, I think, clearly limited it, that you are not saying that it is going to bring structural transformation. So that should be very much clarified. Now, my question is somewhat related with what Nitya raised. So the sort of the underlying conceptual basis of your analysis is when social distance between people increase, empathy will decrease.
Yeah.
But from the reading of the literature, in social psychology and also in economics is also basically focusing on this type of issues. I think the opposite is you are in fact more empathetic. So if I'm let's say middle income person, then I would be much more empathetic for the people who are much, much poorer than me. In fact, I would be envious for people around my income. These are basically competitors. Yeah. So usually in those models, both in economics and social psychology, your empathy increases the lesser the social position of the other individuals. Okay. So because of this, I think it's good to critically examine that starting point. What I feel is, what you practically do is very important. I don't think there is any problem in terms of that. But in terms of conceptually grounding what most likely happens is, just imagine if you have a homogeneous population, the most likely empathy increases the lower the position of the other people. Now, things get complicated when you have heterogeneous population. Let's say population divided by race, by ethnicity, religion, and so on. So in that case, the degree of empathy to your own group compared to the outsiders is not going to be the same. So you could be significantly less empathetic, or you may not even be empathetic at all for the other groups. Yeah? So this social segmentation is, I think, the more important factor, which probably plays an important role in the findings you get rather than empathy. So can you comment on that? Sorry, it's a very long-winded question.
I enjoyed listening to all of it, Barakat. Fantastic set of comments. Just on your your first comments actually about low-cost solutions and marginal change rather than structural transformation. I think that's very apt. We looked at very practical means by which the planners could implement stuff. And of course, getting on to the big structural changes is is much more difficult. And when it comes to, the sorts of decisions that the planners are making, and typically this is, very typical in these large cities, as you know, which is when infrastructure is being developed, then the easiest places to squeeze out or to put that is to squeeze informal settlements, is to, sort of not worry too much about people's tenure and rights and perspectives. So that is a real problem, and how these democratic processes get set aside whenever it comes to larger infrastructure or big structure, not only structural changes in society, but actually physical structures in cities and things is really important. Your point about social position and social differentiation and empathy and competition is really apt. If we go back to, or just in my own reading or what I do with my students, we look at, clearly the likes of Wilkinson and Pickett, the spirit level, and they say about the social cost of inequality to society and the erosion of trust between groups and these sorts of things. But their later work on the inner level, that synthesis showed just what you're talking about, Barakat, which is, people assume there's a zero-sum game between others in the same, socioeconomic situation that they're competing for resources with, but they are more empathetic to social groups that are more dissimilar to themselves. But that's also overlaid, as you say, by other, by ethnicity or, class and other dimensions to it. So it is actually quite, I mean, I was portraying it very starkly here. We only had groups of, we were saying homogenous group of new migrants to the cities and, professionals. But clearly the landscape of empathy, the landscape of how we build solidarity in among populations is much more complicated than that, as you point out, and it does require us to get into that detail. I think it was my very final point, which is the need for cross-disciplinary assessment in this, not to assume that that people act independently or even social groups act independently. They do have empathy for others, and they have no empathy for other groups. So getting into these issues of group identity, including empathy, are really important. And so that does require economics and psychology and other perspectives that look at these sorts of dimensions rather than seeing people as homogenous groups. So thank you for that.
Can I add one short question, Mark?
As long as it's shorter than your previous question, Barakat.
Oh, yeah, it would be. So you use a lot of visual pictures. Probably you may also use videos.
Yeah.
I think now there is a sort of a well-developed, segment of anthropology, which basically focuses. I don't know whether it's called visual anthropology or something.
Yeah.
Are you using insights from that?
Not so much, to be honest. I know that there is a lot of visual ethnography, and in fact, I just examined a PhD using it. And then you get into phenomenology. What's the content of the pictures themselves? What is being portrayed within them, and the meanings that are actually in the images themselves. We're not really using that. This is much more of a social action device, which is, the pictures are there to level the playing field so that everyone's got this, everyone has their own legitimate pictures that represent their interests or their dimensions that they want to talk about, their dimensions of precarity and insecurity. And secondly, the real sort of data, or at least in the way that we use it, and typically is actually generated from the explanation of those. I've shown pictures, but the pictures themselves, the images themselves, are somewhat secondary compared to the meaning and the narratives that individuals give it by speaking about it and talking through them. Is where they, so it's the narratives that are important rather than the pictures themselves. But I do take a point, and maybe others on the call have used these visual methods in in ethnography and other arenas. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Barakat. Thanks, Neil, as well for your responses. Okay, to Kwame now. Are you able to? Perfect. Over to you, Kwame.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to Neil for this brilliant presentation. My question is this. I can see the objective of this research is generating empathy.
Yeah.
And I guess the researcher himself will be moved into empathy while doing this research, and then get a very close connection with, I would say, participants. So my question is, doesn't that raise a problem of subjectivity or risk of bias from the research? I don't know if my question is kind of epistemological one, but yeah.
Totally, it's a very good question, Kwame, and I guess it does speak to the to what I said at the start, that this I made a distinction between this type of research that takes quite a normative perspective, that this is action research, that everyone involved in the research, including the researchers ourselves, are changed by doing the research. So this is not observational research. This is not standing back and trying to describe what precarity is and therefore deduce actions or what the leverage points are, or where this can go. This is actually deliberately setting about, as we put it, to make migrants' lives better. Of course, we as a research team, it has probably made our lives better as well. The interactions with all the people involved, I can reflect on them. I was limited in terms of, I didn't do a lot of the data collection myself, but I met with all the participants in their homes and in the city offices and the planners. And yes, it does. My enthusiasm to talk about this, I guess, comes from, or when I'm thinking about it, I do think of those direct interactions that even all the research team had within this. So I take your point, which is there is subjectivity and bias within that, but I think that is one of the dangers and one of the ethical issues in doing this type of action research. It's a feature, not a bug, I would say, of this type of action. Thanks. Nice question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll just ask maybe a kind of related question, but broadening out a little bit, or asking you to broaden out a little bit your response, Neil. So there's obviously been quite a significant push the last kind of 10, 15 years to pluralize the way in which we value different worldviews. If you think about climate change adaptation research, to kind of bring in more indigenous knowledge and to think about what that can say in terms of how we think about the processes and ways in which we adapt. But one of the kind of the tensions that I see in terms of this need to pluralize and to consult more widely and engage different groups is that ultimately we still have to arrive at a course of action, which will inevitably result in, I guess, the narrowing down of kind of what we do by dint of the fact that we're needing to move forward, we're needing to make certain decisions. So do you see a tension between, on the one hand, the kind of the very needed kind of way in which we have to diversify how we think and to kind of bring in and try to build these broad coalitions, as opposed to the need to make decisions which can narrow down ultimately kind of maybe the evidence that we draw on, or it can disregard in terms of the action certain groups or certain perspectives?
Wow, that's an almost irresolvable or unanswerable, perhaps, question, Mark. I think you've hit the nail on the head. There is a tension here. I think I don't really have anything to add to it, to be honest, to your comment. It's a good reflection, which is, this type of action research does try and pluralize, forms of knowledge, perhaps we are, fiddling at the margin and not doing those structural things as Nietzsche referred to, and that sort of thing. It does promote some element of recognition, and which is an important dimension of justice. But I guess all research is limited. Maybe we need to use other means by which social change for social change actually to happen. So great point. I don't really have an answer to it, to be honest.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Nitya.
Just a very quick question. Sorry, this is one thing is triggering something else. I mean, coming to the gender point, which I think I have to raise, Neil, that these, I mean, the pictures, they looked quite, and the workshop looked quite male in terms of its composition. And is this because it's Bangladesh where, women would not generally come into those, or that women are not that many migrants? But I'm just wondering that in this, and this is not what you presented, but since you've done the project, did any of this kind of empathy or policy outcomes, if you like, also focus on sort of gender-specific needs?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that question directly. And if we've got time, I know we're coming up to the hour. I now see that my colleague Lucy Snabuva is on the call, and this is, Lucy, don't feel you have to, but it would be lovely to hear from someone else on the team, the original team. And you've just led this paper, and congratulations on getting it out. Oh, yes, you are, Lucy. If you're willing to say something about the gender dimensions in a second. Just to say the context of that, Nietzsche, is that, there among the city planners, there were no women. Among the migrant population, among the migrant cohort of participants in the research, there were women. There are a lot of women moving for formal jobs to Chattogram. It's a big centre of the garment industry. In some senses, they are economically empowered and working outside the home and articulate and the rest of it. Of course, all of these research, no matter where you're doing this, falls within the social structures that you're working within. Could we overthrow the patriarchy through this research? I would love to think so, but we do what we can in the context. Lucy, to celebrate the fact that our paper has just landed, do you want to just say something about the gender dimension again? Thanks.
Yes, hi, thank you so much, and fantastic talk, Neil. It was really nice to see it all kind of being presented, in such a wholesome way. So yeah, thank you so much for the question, Nitya, and nice to see some familiar faces as well from my UEA days. So yes, as Neil mentioned, indeed, in terms of the planners, they were all male, and I think, yes, it is probably a reflection of essentially, who occupies these positions of power, so to speak, right, in a patriarchal society, such as the one in Bangladesh. And in terms of the people we worked with on the migrant side, so we did have 4 women and 6 males. I actually just quickly had a look in the paper just to make sure I get that right. So as Neil said, there is definitely female presence, and in my experience, in the workshops, talking to the women, some of them in particular weren't shy at all coming forward and sharing their experiences. And then yes, maybe just a reflection on the issue about us as researchers becoming empathic. So of course I can share exactly what Neil said. Doing this work, interacting with the people 100%, and I think that's also an important thing because we are also in a position of power and able to change these narratives, like at the local, but also like beyond that level. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Lovely to hear from you. Everyone on the call, go out and read the paper.
Yes, thanks very much, Lucy. So we have now reached the hour. So just for me to thank Neil for the presentation, but also to thank Lucy and the wider team that were involved in the research. That'd be colleagues from the University of Dhaka. I'd also like to express my thanks to Ritika, who has been tireless in organising this seminar series. So thank you very much, Ritika. And as I said at the beginning, we are now kind of turning our attention to the spring semester. So do keep your eyes out for what will be coming in the spring semester. And finally, just to say that this seminar series has been delivered as part of the Success Project, which is funded through the CLARE programme, which is funded by FCDO, the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office in the UK, and IDRC, the International Development Research Centre in Canada. So thanks also to our funders. With that, I shall bring everything to a close. So thank you all very much. Thanks for your participation and attendance as well.